Alex, we begin with British Prime Minister Boris Johnson. He is now in intensive care and receiving oxygen, not on a ventilator, though. He was trying to shake off the effects of the coronavirus yesterday. His condition worsened. Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab will run the government on a temporary basis and at a crucial time. In the week ahead in the UK, the pandemic is expected to peak. Now to Japan. That's where Prime Minister Shinzo Abe declared a state of emergency in Tokyo and surrounding regions. There's been a recent surge in the number of confirmed coronavirus cases. The emergency will last for a month, and it gives local governments more power to contain the spread of the disease. The world's biggest oil producers are moving toward an agreement, this to call off their price war and cut output. Ministers and diplomats will spend the next 2 days talking about who's willing to cut production. The key players, Saudi Arabia, Russia, and the U.S. And we end with Democratic senators asking Deutsche Bank for details of its contacts with President Donald Trump's family business. The Trump Organization asking the German lender for leniency on some of its loans. The senators want to know the extent to which Deutsche holds financial leverage over the president. Global News, 24 hours a day on air. Now, Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Viviana Hurtado. This is Bloomberg.
I am David Weston. Bloomberg Television is reinventing one of the most iconic brands in financial television for a new audience. Join me to see the news program for the clever investor. This is Bloomberg Wall Street Week.
Live from New York, I'm Alex Steele, joined by Guy Johnson in London. Welcome to Bloomberg Markets. We do want to give you a check-in on where equities are trading. Taylor Riggs has more. Hey, Taylor.
Alex, so let's pull up a board of some of the major averages that were falling following one of the biggest point day advances yesterday. You're continuing to see a lot of that strength and hope and optimism continue to filter through again today. You have the S&P 500 up about 1.6% or so. This is after a monster rally that we really had across all of the major sectors yesterday. And you're also, I wanted to throw in crude for you here, Alex. Crude is catching a bid here, up about 1.7%. This is after there are some hopes that Saudi and Russia will be meeting on Thursday to talk about reducing some of the supply glut that we've seen. As we know, demand has fallen off a cliff given no one is driving. And so some hopes here that perhaps we can fix at least the supply side of things before we get to the demand side. I want to flip up the board and take a look at ExxonMobil over the last 11 days or so. They have come out and said that they're slashing CapEx by about $10 billion. That would be 30% or so. They're going to reduce spending to about $23 billion. This would be Of course, coming in the Permian Basin, that's over in West Texas and New Mexico, really starting to look back on cutting on drilling and fracking. So that, of course, would also help contribute to the drop in supply that we might start to see. I've talked a lot about if we're out of the bear market or not. I'm going to leave that up to the experts, but I'll give you the facts here. What we do know is that the MSCI All World Index is now up more than 20% from the lows that we saw. The S&P 500 also up about 23% from the lows on March 23rd. And so a lot of the sectors within the S&P 500 are also starting to climb out of that bear market, led by energy, which is now up 40% off of its 52-week lows, led in part by utilities and industrials as well, all up more than 20% or so from the lows that we have seen of just a few months ago. Finally, a lot of the travel stocks led yesterday. Those are continuing to lead. Again, today you have Carnival, the cruise lines, United Airlines, MGM Resorts, Darden Restaurants, all really rebounding on hopes that if some of these virus cases have started to level out, perhaps we're starting to get back to reopening some parts of these economy. Guy?
That sounds very nice. Taylor, thank you very much indeed. And now, as part of our conversations with Johns Hopkins experts, Tom Keene and I spoke to Alessandro Robucci, Johns Hopkins University Carey Business School Associate Professor of Economics and Finance, about the economic strain caused by the virus and how close we are to an EM crisis.
We are very close. Emerging markets have been hit very hard by the initial phase of the crisis. We've seen massive outflow of capital from most emerging markets repatriating in the United States. The COVID epidemic is just picking up in emerging markets. As we know, it lasts for about 4 months, and the peak is for 2 months. And emerging markets are much less capable of absorbing the health dimension of the crisis. They will be put under extreme strain, and we expect to see unprecedented decline in economic activity and possibly widespread financial damages.
Professor, you are a world authority in real estate. It's something maybe diffuse, it's out there, it's not something we really can touch. How is the leverage within the global real estate system? Are they exposed as other asset classes were exposed in 1998?
At the global level, leverage in the real estate is not as diffuse and deep as in the United States. Typically, in emerging markets, real estate purchases take place on a cash basis. So from that perspective, leverage in the real estate is not necessarily the most important problem. However, research shows that impact in individual communities affected by pandemic can be extremely long-lasting. So certain segments of mega cities in emerging markets may be particularly damaged by the crisis, by the health dimension of the crisis itself.
Alessandro, can I talk a little bit about what is happening here in Europe? Italy finds itself in a very difficult situation. Its economy already sort of burdened with a huge amount of debt. It's likely to take on significantly more. What is your perception of the economic trajectory of Italy and whether or not its debt is sustainable?
Italy is in a particularly difficult situation because it was already experiencing difficulty to recover from the global financial crisis. Effectively, Italy never recovered from the global financial crisis, and growth was permanently hit by that shock. These new catastrophes will be extremely damaging for the and help is desperately needed from the European community, ideally from the rest of the international community. There is a lot of talk about options for financial rescue through European mechanisms. I think it is the time to consider emergency help for international financial institutions and chiefly the International Monetary Fund, which helped other European economies during the financial crisis.
Okay, and that was John Hopkins, Professor Alessandro Ravucci. Coming up, a longer look at what is happening and a bright spot. We've got one for you. This is Bloomberg.
Live from New York, I'm Alex Steele, joined by Guy Johnson in London. So let's give you a bright spot, potentially in the markets, and that comes in the form of tech. So Samsung is a rare bright spot during the pandemic with better than expected profit in the March quarter. Now the news revives some hope that a surge in internet use from people sheltering in place will actually help make up for the drop-off in demand for smartphones and other consumer electronics. But guys, the long-term effects are still really unknown, and it's great to say that more people are using Zoom, therefore they need their chips. But at some point, the lack of demand in smartphones has got to come home to roost for some of these guys.
We also wonder how the cycle's going to work, Alex. Normally these things are on a fairly regular cycle. We get new updated phones. You're looking at one of them on the screen right now. And you just wonder how that's going to be affected. Particularly, I'm wondering how we're going to see disruption in terms of kind of the normal season. You get to the back end of this year, you start in the run-up to Christmas. Are people going to be in a position to upgrade their phones? Are they still going to want to upgrade their phones? Are we going to miss out an entire kind of tranche of phones that we would have expected? Are we going to jump from 5 to 7 and miss out 6? I'm randomly picking numbers here, but you know what I mean. And it's going to be really interesting to see whether or not these big suppliers just basically kind of say, we've continued to innovate, we can therefore bring you better phones further down the road, or whether they continue with what they've got at the moment. I simply don't know. Business planning must be incredibly difficult.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but it does show that the semis can probably do well. It kind of reaffirms Micron's forecast and says, okay, well, that may not be some kind of anomaly, but I know I don't really care about my iPhone right now, so there you go.
Yeah, though, to be honest, they're all pretty useful right now. We're all relying on them maybe a little bit more than most. It's interesting, Samsung's making a lot of its business in terms of its online businesses at the moment, and that seems to be counterweighting some of the hardware businesses, which I suspect you're going to see a lot going forward from here. Businesses are going to want a hardware business and a software business kind of to counteract each other maybe a little bit. Anyway, still ahead, we are going to discuss the state of small business in the United Kingdom and what more the government and lenders need to do to help. We're going to be joined by this man, Ian Workman, Barclays co-head of SME Banking. That conversation is coming up next. European markets certainly on a roll as we head towards the European close. This is Bloomberg.
another day of risk off across the financial markets. We bring you special coverage of all the price action and implications here on Bloomberg Television.
I was actually poor.
No foreplay?
Eat your bag of Lay's with a smile on your face.
If all the diseases have been taken, I'll take a tax.
Half past the hour, live from London, I'm Guy Johnson with Alex Steele over in New York. This is Bloomberg Markets. Now, despite making £330 billion available to small businesses, the UK government is now facing mounting criticism that its support programme is overly complicated. It's also being argued that banks tasked with making loans to struggling firms are simply not delivering the money fast enough, despite an easing of the eligibility standards over the last few days by government. Joining us now on the phone is Ian Workman, co-head of SME Banking, joining us from Barclays. Ian, we really appreciate your time. Can you just give me a sense of where we are in this process? How many applications you're getting from small and medium-sized enterprises? How many loans you've been able to make under the government scheme?
Yeah, sure. Afternoon, guys. So, look, over the last couple of weeks, we've been really focused on what support we can give SMEs across the UK. And that falls into a couple of areas, one of which is the loan product you're talking about there, in terms of the business interruption loan, but also what other support we can provide SMEs in terms of actually helping them with their banking and charges, etc. So, in terms of specifics around applications, we can't give you specific numbers now, but what I would say is typically you would expect in the UK only around probably about 15 or 20% of SMEs would borrow money. Most small businesses would be trading in cash. But what we've seen in the last 2 weeks in particular is the number of inquiries have substantially increased, and the number of applications as a result are now flowing through. Because initially people had to give us more information that we required to actually help them with those loans. So I'd say probably an uptick of probably about 20-30%, Guy, in the last 2 or 3 weeks.
Do you think it's going well? Is it working smoothly? Is it working as well as you think business needs it to work? Where are the bottlenecks? I'm just kind of wondering why we're getting such criticism about the fact that the interruption loans are not going out of the door fast enough. I'm certainly reading article after article and hearing interview after interview about the fact that business is still struggling to get some of the support that it needs.
Yeah, I mean, look, at the start, pushing a product out like this so quickly, there were some questions. I think you'll be aware in terms of personal guarantees that we're now supporting all loan applications without the need for personal guarantee, and that certainly speeded up the process. But I think we are getting out loans to customers. I was talking to a customer in Bath, a hotel, that's just secured a loan, a £450,000 loan to assist them with the period while they're on lockdown, etc. I think what we're seeing now is better understanding from SMEs, particularly helping them educate in terms of what's needing. Because, Guy, the big thing that we're really conscious as a responsible lender is this isn't a grant, it is a loan. And therefore, whilst businesses are in desperate need of cash, There's a range of things they can do, which is including the government grants that are available, which aren't repayable. And then the loans which we're offering, yes, they are interest-free and fee-free in the first 12 months. What we're very cognizant of is that actually, once we're through this crisis and through that 12 months, businesses are going to have to repay that money. And therefore, we really need to make sure that what we don't do is put businesses in a situation where they've taken on debt that they can't afford to repay in the future. So we spent probably the last week or so helping customers with these applications and working out. The other thing we've done is we'd already launched a £14 billion fund to support SMEs prior to this crisis, part of our Brexit planning. The other thing we've done is we've got 360,000 SMEs across the UK that have got pre-assessed lending limits, which they can access via their Barclays app or on their online banking, which basically gives them instant access to finance as well. So what we're trying to do is look at lots and lots of ways of how we can really get money out very quickly to these SMEs across the UK that need it.
I guess, Ian, my question is that how is it possible that a business owner has any visibility into their own sales to be able to repay any loan? I mean, at least here in the U.S., with the small business loan, is that you're just going to pay back the interest. It's essentially as a grant with interest. That's why it really had to be backstopped, in essence, by the Fed. How are they going to pay it back?
Yeah, it's a great question. Look, I mean, and nobody knows is the answer, Alex. I mean, that's the thing where, you know, we're in such uncertain times. And what we're doing is working with customers. And look, I think the underlying principle for me as a banker is if you were a good business in 2019, you're still a good business. You're just impacted by, you know, the virus and the situation that we're in the UK and across the globe. So actually what we're doing is sitting back and saying, okay, look, let's have a look at your performance in 2019. Let's look back a little bit further as well. Many of our clients have been with us for many, many years, so we've got a good credit history with them. So it's not just reliant on those forecasts. It's thinking, okay, let's look at how you've run the business in the past. Let's look at, like the hotel that I talked about, let's think about, okay, what were your seasons like previously? We'd expect that to pick up again in 2021. And let's base the serviceability on those rather than, as you say, Alex, thinking about a number where people just don't know.
But Ian, that also implies that where these companies were before the crisis, they can get to after the crisis. I mean, I know that Morgan Stanley doesn't see that happening for the U.S. economy, for example, until the end of 2021. At what point are you going to either just have to forgive the loans or go to the BOE and say, you guys need to help me lend to these companies because I don't want to take on any more risk here?
So, I mean, I've worked with SMEs for about 25 years. And I've worked with them through very different crises. From I heard you talk about, you know, the property recession back in the 90s, you know, the banking crisis a few years ago. And SMEs actually are quite resilient. The good thing about the SMEs in the UK in particular, a number of them have built up cash reserves over the last few years. And actually many of them are using those cash reserves. I'm less concerned about the pickup because particularly when you talk about the small end, Alex, you're talking about that coffee shop, that barber that you go to on a regular basis. And actually, they actually have a very loyal client base that once the lockdown and they can actually start trading again, we're very optimistic that actually the SME sector in the UK will bounce back and will recover. Because they're small, they can respond quicker than perhaps a larger business with bigger infrastructure and bigger process and bureaucracy to go behind it as well.
We are probably, Ian, though, going to see a wave of insolvencies. In order to prevent that happening, do you think we need to see debt forgiveness? Do you think there does need to be some degree of debt forgiveness in the United Kingdom? And if that doesn't happen, the insolvencies come through, do you think we need a clearer, less complex, more straightforward insolvency scheme here in the UK to cope with what is potentially coming towards us?
So I'm not seeing any evidence of it yet, and that's a good sign. I think inevitably there will be businesses, unfortunately, that were sort of trading at marginal profit or losses over the last few years, and this actually, unfortunately, will mean that they can't see a way out. But actually, I think, you know, we've got some really good processes in place at Barclays. We have a business support team that we've got about a 70% track record of turning around those businesses, and that's what we're concentrating. So, for example, one of the things we've done recently is we've actually put more people into those business support teams so that we've got people ready to go and work with these businesses and help them find a way out. So, Guy, I'm really hopeful that actually we won't see that. And so far, I'm not seeing the indication that people will take that route. Where I am focused on the moment is actually those smaller SMEs as well. Sorry, Guy.
Yeah, absolutely. And just kind of my final question really is in terms of the resources you're putting behind this, How easy is it to get through to one of your advisors? Where are those advisors?
Yeah.
And once I get a loan agreed, what kind of commercial terms are you putting them on? I'm talking about an average here as well. Interest rates are very low in this country now. They are basically zero coming out of the Bank of England, which I can see in front of me. What kind of rates are you going to be charging some of these SMEs? Clearly, it's going to be kind of risk-weighted, but I'm curious to know.
No. So, look, I think when the crisis first hit, like many big businesses, we were impacted by a huge spike in volume of calls. And we got to that really quickly because we could obviously see the volumes coming through. And I'm really pleased that colleagues from across the group, that people that normally work in our call centres, that normally work in business banking, came in to help us. And I was looking at the statistics just before I came on the call. You know, our call waiting times now are down to about 6 or 7 minutes, which is still too long, by the way. They're normally 30 seconds, but it's come down massively from where we were about a week ago, and that's because we put lots of people in that. At a time, don't forget, when we've got colleagues obviously impacted personally by the virus. In terms of commercial rates, as you alluded there, Guy, clearly it's on a case-by-case situation, and you'll see rates that depend on your personal circumstances. But I have to say, some of the rates that I saw quoted in the press are far off actually what the commercial rates are that we are lending to customers. And I would add, you're absolutely right, you know, with rates at historic lows, when I'm looking at the typical rates and some of the rates that customers are paying, they are very low rates that I've ever seen in the 30 years.
Yeah, no doubt. I really appreciate that. It was really interesting for me to learn about that. Ian Workman, co-head of SME banking over at Barclays. Thank you very much. I did want to break some news for you here. The Saudi G20 presidency is going to hold G20 energy ministers meeting on April 10th. So interesting to note, we are supposedly having that Saudi and Russia, basically OPEC plus meeting on Thursday, and then now on Friday it looks like the G20 presidency is going to hold a G20 energy minister meeting. Will they actually come to some kind of cohesive deal? We'll break that down over the next couple hours. Coming up, it is part of my conversation with former Fed Governor Dan Tarullo. He says the Fed could double its balance sheet. This is Bloomberg.
If you're not with the cold, how did you find this place? I followed a map from